Live. We're going live. A live stream at a different time for me and for you, but we're definitely going live, and we'll see how this goes. Hi, Bob the Canadian. We'll get started in about 26 seconds on this lesson about things that confuse people. I'm just making sure everything is working. It looks like it is. So we'll start in about 14 seconds, and I'll explain why I'm doing this at a different time than normal, and hopefully I'll help you learn a whole bunch of things about things that confuse people or confusing things. 2, 1. Well, hello and welcome to this English lesson about confusing things or things that confuse people. Wouldn't it be nice if life was just really, really easy? Wouldn't it be Wouldn't it be nice if you just understood everything when you first saw it or did it or learned how to do it? But unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. But maybe it's a good thing, because it is always fun to figure things out, to learn how to do things. But sometimes as you go through life, you run into things that are a little bit confusing. So in this English lesson, I'll talk about those confusing things, and I'm not going to give you solutions. I'll probably just talk about the situations that are confusing. And if I have some wisdom to give, if I have some way to avoid being confused in those situations, I'll share that as well. But mostly, we're going to have an English lesson about confusing things. Before we get started, a few things that I want to mention. One is welcome to this live English lesson on a Thursday night. It's Thursday night for me. I know I normally do these on Friday mornings, and I know that some of you are disappointed and maybe even unable to be here. So if you're watching this later, sorry about changing the time. It's just temporary. I'll be doing a live English lesson tonight. I'll be doing a live English lesson next Thursday night. And then I'll return to Fridays again in a couple weeks. So this is not a permanent change. This is simply something I'm doing just for a little bit because, work gets in the way sometimes. I have to do something for work tomorrow morning. And next week, Friday as well, I need to do something for work. So I'll do it on a Thursday night. If you're watching this, if you're watching the replay, I'll say hi anyways. I know a lot of my viewers in Europe and in other parts of that, and from that part of the world, will have trouble because it's 1 or 2 in the morning. But I do welcome all of the other people who are here. Welcome to Freddie Wolf and Brent from Speak English with This Guy and Stacy Gion. Welcome to Noriko and Todd and Dave, who are here to moderate. I was happy to hear they could come. Hi to Vitor and Min from Vietnam. Just saying hi to a few people here before I get started. Hi to Leticia, Jan Chan, Nuguk, Carlos, and Flavio. Hi to all of you. Good to see you. I think we should get this lesson started. Here we go. Sorry, my dogs both started barking and they're both running out, and somebody is here. I'm not sure who. I'm just going to not worry about who's driving in. Anyways, let's get this lesson started. To be confused. So let's talk about the verb to be confused. When you are confused, it simply means that you don't understand something. Someone's told you something or shown you something and you don't understand it. Your brain can't make sense of it. You don't know what they're showing you or how to figure it out. It's not a nice thing to be. When you are confused, it's an uncomfortable feeling. I like being the opposite. I like it when I know how to do something. I like it when I learn something and it's really easy to learn. But sometimes it's just something where you end up being a bit confused. One of those things would be directions. I in particular love GPS because I never used to like getting directions from someone. When you get directions from someone, they tell you how to get somewhere. Like if I was driving and if I pulled over, I could say, hey, could you tell me how to get to the lake? Could you tell me how to get to the beach? And someone would say, drive this way for an hour and then turn left on I'm trying to think of a road name, on Yonge Street, and you will eventually get there. But getting directions can be very, very confusing. So my solution for this would be, if you have a phone, use GPS. It simplifies things quite a bit. The GPS app just tells you where to go, and it's awesome. I find instructions can also be confusing. Some of the furniture in my room, this desk, it's a little blurry, this little table, some of the furniture in my room came from a place called IKEA, and it came with directions. It came with instructions. It came with, a sheet of paper that told you how to put it together, and you have to follow the instructions. So notice I use the word directions there as well. We use directions and instructions interchangeably sometimes. Anyways, it came with instructions, and those instructions told me how to put it together. So the solution I would give here, if you are confused when you're reading instructions, when you're putting together furniture, read them step by step and follow them closely. I think that's the best way when you're building something with instructions to get it done properly. Recipes. I find these confusing sometimes because I don't always know if I've bought the right ingredients. Sometimes the recipe will have the measurements in ounces instead of cups, or in milliliters instead of cups. We use cups here a lot. And so with the measuring cup, I sometimes find it a little bit confusing to follow a recipe. My recommendation for not being confused with a recipe is, once again, read it carefully and follow it as closely as possible. Math. Now, I can't say that I find math confusing all the time, but there was a time in my life when I was taking high-level math at university, and it was very confusing. When it's just numbers, I can do a pretty good job. When it's algebra, I can do a pretty good job. But when you get into calculus and linear algebra and all of those kinds of things, it's a little bit bewildering for me. So math is something that definitely people do sometimes find confusing. I don't have a solution for this one, but just study math as hard as you can and do the best you can. If you don't have a good mind for math, that's okay. You'll figure it out. Sports rules. So this is something I find interesting. I know the rules for American football. I know the rules for baseball. I know the rules for hockey and basketball. But sometimes when you watch the Olympics, they'll play rugby, or they'll play Australian rules football, or they'll play cricket. And some of you know those rules, but I find them confusing because when I watch the game, I don't know something. I feel like I'm having a bit of a technical issue. Let me just double check something. Yeah, I think it's back to normal now. Sorry about that. I think we just had a little bit of an internet outage, but I think it's back. So let's get back to this. Sometimes when I'm watching an unfamiliar sport, I don't know what's going on. And I think I just said that's a phrase we use when we're confused. If you say, I don't know what's going on, I don't know the rules for this game. Filling out forms. This is something I do find confusing. I do not enjoy filling out forms. When you go to the bank or when you apply for insurance, you have to fill out a lot of paperwork. You have to fill out a lot of forms, and it can be really confusing. Sometimes they ask for information and you don't know exactly what they're asking for. Sometimes they ask for information from another piece of paper and you don't know where you put it. So filling out a form can certainly be something that's very, very challenging and very, very confusing. My advice for this would be, if you're filling out forms at the bank, get someone at the bank to help you. Or if you have someone in your family that's really knowledgeable about banking or insurance, have them help you fill out your forms. Time zones. So this is one where I'm always a little bit confused. I used to have a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law that lived in British Columbia, and they were always 3 hours ahead of us. And then I know that people in France are 6 hours or 5 hours behind me. Wait, or is it the other way around? See, that's why time zones are confusing. I think I just got confused myself. Some people are really good at understanding time zones. I'm not. So I think like some of you who are viewing from Europe, If it's evening here, it's probably early in the morning there. But in British Columbia, it's probably only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So time zones certainly can be confusing. And then time change. So some countries observe time change. Some countries don't. We call it daylight savings time. In the spring, we move our clocks forward. And in the fall, we move our clocks backwards by 1 hour. But it can be a little bit confusing when that happens, especially if I'm doing live English lessons. Because for some people, all of a sudden my lesson is at a different time of day by 1 hour. So time change can certainly be a little bit confusing for some people. And then technology. This is a general statement. I find setting the clock on my microwave confusing. Sometimes I find apps on my phone a little bit confusing, and I like technology. So I can't imagine how challenging it must be for someone who doesn't really love it as much as I do. I love getting a new computer, but I still find it a little bit confusing sometimes to get it set up properly. Hey, let's look at some questions here. I did notice the chat was filling up with people. So I see Rod is here, same time zone as me. So from Brazil. Good to see you, Rod. Cecilia is here as well. Good to see you. Again, I'm doing this lesson this evening instead of tomorrow morning because I have to work tomorrow morning. Work sometimes gets in the way of the things you really want to do. And it looks like that little technical glitch was just a brief thing. Let's look at some questions, everybody. Let me find a question to put on the screen here. Renata has the first question, more of encouragement, I think. I have great news for those learning English. At first, it's scary and confusing, but then it starts to get easier. The secret, keep studying. English is actually simple. So I like that statement, English is actually simple. Because if you can break the learning of English down into simple steps, and if you can work at it every day, and if you can just make sure you keep doing it over time, you'll be surprised eventually how much you actually know and how much less confused you are. Yaroslav says, good evening, the wisest teacher, Bob. It's pretty late in Ukraine. It's probably 2 a.m, isn't it? But still, I wish everyone a good lesson. My question is, what is the most confusing thing to you? The most confusing thing to me is when people do something and it's obvious there's a better way to do it and they still do it in a way that's inefficient or wastes time. So I hope that makes some sense to you, but I think people are the most confusing thing to me. So I know people aren't things, but we'll talk about that later. I find people somewhat confusing sometimes, especially when they're doing certain kinds of work. Andre Padron says, hello, Mr. Bob. There's a fake account with a picture of Mr. Bob responding to comments on YouTube. I just want to let people know in the community. Yes, so Brent has mentioned this as well, and I'm going to look into it again. Thanks for letting me know again, Andre. Apparently, there's a fake Bob the Canadian account with my picture. It's not me. Here's how you know it's not me. I never asked to meet you in WhatsApp. I never ask for money. I don't sell lessons. If all I do is make English lessons and give them to you, that's all I do. So if there's an account, look at it carefully. I will investigate and get that account removed. But thanks, Andre, for mentioning that. I will make sure I take care of it. Hi to Dulio. Good to see you as well. Dulio had a nice comment on my other channel the other day. Leticia is here as well. Thanks for joining, Leticia. And Eugene from Etobicoke. Hi, Eugene. Eugene, did you get the big rainstorm up there in Etobicoke? We had a hard rain about an hour ago. Ivan is here. Good to see you as well. Let me get to the next question. From Freddie, the night owl. Hi, Bob. I don't have any questions so far, even though it's Friday morning, 1 a.m., and I try to keep my eyes and ears open. Have a good day tomorrow. You too, Freddie. Sorry for the time change. Thanks for staying up, and thanks for leaving a question. That's awesome. Hey, we're going to jump back to the lesson. I do want to say hi to the 231 people watching. You guys are awesome. Thanks for being here. And I do want to say hi to anyone who's watching the replay. I know many of you might be watching this tomorrow morning during the regular time slot. Sorry we missed you. Sorry you missed the live, but let's continue with the lesson. I see Eugene says, not yet. Maybe it missed you, Eugene. Maybe it was just us down here in Niagara that got the rain. Here we go. The fine print. So whenever you sign a document or whenever you buy something, usually there's some fine print at the bottom. Sometimes, like here, we have a coupon for a store. And then at the bottom, there's some fine print. So you might have like a coupon that says buy one, get one free. And then the fine print might say that you have to buy a drink with the food in order to get one free. So sometimes the fine print can be confusing. This fine print says offer valid only at participating locations, which in this case means all locations. So this is probably some good fine print here. But sometimes when you have an official piece of paper or document or coupon or form, there might be really small writing at the bottom called the fine print, and it might be confusing. We call it the small print as well, but I usually call it the fine print. Foreign languages. Foreign languages could definitely be confusing. So if you are learning English, which almost all of you are, sometimes you probably find it confusing. I know sometimes when I'm watching a French television show, I find it confusing. Sometimes when I'm trying to read something in French, I find it confusing. Even though I'm a French speaker, sometimes I do find it confusing. Probably the most confusing thing for all of us is when someone speaks the language we're learning and they speak too quickly or they use a lot of slang. That's when foreign languages can get extremely difficult to understand, and it can be confusing. My solution for this one would be do a lot of reading, speaking, listening, and writing. Do all four, and things will be less confusing for you. Cryptocurrency. I do not know a lot about cryptocurrency. I don't know a lot about Bitcoin. I find the whole cryptocurrency world very confusing. So it's just not something I know a lot about. I think younger people probably understand this better, but certainly cryptocurrency is a new kind of digital money that some people use to buy and sell things. And I would just say this, that maybe it's the future. In English, when you say something's the future, it means it's the next thing. Like I think when people had horses and they saw a car, they were like, oh, that's the future. The car is the future of transportation. Maybe this is the future of money. What would I say? Just wait and see. That's my advice for if you are confused by cryptocurrency, just wait and see. Maybe it will become easier to use and easier to understand. Converting currencies. So this happens to me all the time because I talk to people who live in other countries and they'll say, I get paid this many euros a year, or I get paid when I buy a hamburger, it costs, this many US dollars. And it's always hard. I'm glad we have the internet, and that's my advice here. If you are confused with currency exchanges or converting currencies to other countries' currencies, just use the internet quickly. I'm often converting, like I'll type in 70 euro in Canadian dollars, and then the internet tells me what it is. But certainly trying to do it in your head is very, very confusing. Oops. Sorry, I just have a really itchy nose. I don't know what's happening. It's kind of a weird thing. I'll try to stop doing this, but I'll edit that out on the other video. Public transportation. When I lived in Quebec City, when I first moved there, this is a long time ago, when I was in my early 20s, I found public transportation confusing. They have a really good bus system in Quebec City, and it took a long time to learn how to use it. And maybe you are living in a city that has a subway and there's a train and there's a bus system, and maybe there's trolley cars or streetcars. Learning how it works can be very, very confusing. The cool thing is once you know how it works, so let me stop here for a sec. Rod says, yep, there's a fake chatting in his own chat. I took a screenshot for it. For what it's worth, it's at Learn English with Bob the Canadian. So we have like a fake Bob the Canadian in the chat. Interesting. Well, I'll let Todd and Dave take care of that, and then we'll fix that later. Let's get back to public transportation. Um, once you know how to use it, it's very, very nice, but sometimes it can be confusing at first. My recommendation for this would be if you can find someone who lives in that city, they can probably help you learn how to navigate public transportation. Setting an alarm or clock. Now, for this one, I will say this. This is confusing if it's a digital clock. The old-fashioned round clock with the hand wasn't as confusing, but I know for myself, setting the clock on my stove, like we have an oven with a digital clock, setting the clock on the microwave after the power goes out, setting my own alarm clock. It took me a while to figure out what buttons to push. In this case, I would say if you are confused and it's hard for you to do that, I would say a good solution is read the manual or read the instructions. Historical sites. So an historical site can be confusing because sometimes we don't know why it's there. This is Stonehenge, and there are a lot of theories about why this was built. No one knows exactly why this was built, and many countries have historical sites, and there are things at that site where no one really knows who built it or why they built it or what it was for. So this is one really good example. There are more examples around the world where we have historical sites and everyone's a little bit confused. Like, how did they get these big rocks there? How did they set these big rocks up? They didn't have cranes when they built it to lift and move the rocks. So sometimes an historical site can be very, very confusing. Taxes. This is the one where when I was making the lesson, I said to Jen, what else do you think is confusing? And Jen said, taxes. So I'm sure this is the same in every country. It's always strange to figure out how much tax you owe. And I'm talking about income tax. In Canada, you need to file for taxes every year in April. You need to tell the government how much money you made and how much you donated, and then they tell you how much tax you owe. And it's always a little bit confusing for me. The solution for me is I pay someone else to do my taxes for me. So I have a bookkeeper who I have do my taxes, mostly because we run a farm and the taxes get quite complicated. So taxes can definitely be confusing. The solution, hire a professional to do your taxes for you. User manuals. So user manuals are kind of both. They can be confusing, but they can also be very, very helpful. When you buy a camera, it comes with a user manual. When you buy a microwave, it comes with a user manual. And when you open the user manual, it tells you how to do certain things. What I find though is user manuals aren't always written very clearly. In fact, sometimes our user manuals are written by people who don't fully understand English. It's kind of interesting. So sometimes you will read things and you're like, oh, the person who wrote this is not a native English speaker or not a proficient English speaker. It depends on where it was made in the world. But yeah, it's certainly interesting. User manuals can both be confusing, but they can also be very, very helpful, depending on who wrote it and how logical they were. Classes. So I took a few classes in my life that were very interesting and very easy to understand. You can also take classes that are very challenging and very hard to understand. I hope when I teach that I'm not confusing people. I hope when I teach, I'm helping people understand. But certainly, I've had my fair share of classes that have actually been confusing. One, of course, would be my second calculus class in university. I found it very, very confusing. The solution, if you have a class that's confusing, is that you should find classmates who you can study with, especially if you're in university or if you are an adult learner. If you can find people to help, not to help, but who you can study with, do homework with, especially if you're learning English, I think it can be very, very helpful. The opposite sex. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term, but it's kind of a funny thing. Sometimes people find the opposite sex confusing or hard to understand. What I mean by that is this. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I found it kind of challenging to understand women. I was very immature. And I think women, when they're in their late teens and early 20s, have trouble understanding men sometimes. And in English, we just say it's the opposite sex. I find the opposite sex kind of confusing. I don't know what makes women tick, or a woman might say, I don't know what makes men tick. That means you don't understand exactly why they do the things that they do. So this is another one that made me laugh a little bit because this is a lesson on confusing things, but I'm going to add people into the mix. So the opposite sex can be confusing for people. And again, this means men sometimes have trouble understanding women, and women sometimes have trouble understanding men. Why do men do some of the things they do? Or why do women do some of the things they do? It can be a little bit confusing. Interest rates. So I actually have a pretty good understanding of interest rates, mostly because I had a lot of student loans. So I had to repay my student loans. And so I learned how interest rates work, and that the faster you pay something back, the better it is for you. I also learned a little bit more about interest when I borrowed money to buy the farm. So we got a mortgage to buy the farm. So we learned a bit. This would be another one where I would highly recommend, in order to understand interest rates and to understand how that works, the banking system, is to talk to an expert. It's always a good idea to talk to someone who really knows that area. It can be super helpful. Okay, I'm going to start members only chat a little early because this lesson is running on time and on schedule. So let's do about 10 minutes of questions, and I will take questions directly from the chat as well. Hey, Kimmy and Kiwi are here. So they made it in spite of the different time for the lesson. So good to see you. Let me have a sip of water and I will answer your question. Let's see here. Good evening, Bob. What is the difference between fit and suit? Can I also use suit like this? What you've said doesn't suit you. Have a great day. So when you say something suits someone, like these really suit me. When I wear blue shirts, it really suits me. Having a job where I teach subjects I like really suits me. We would also say it's a good fit. Okay. Teaching is a good fit for me. It suits me. And maybe that's the two words you're looking for, the phrase good fit and to suit. You know, farming really suits Jen. She loves being outside. She loves growing things. So farming suits her. Farming is a good fit for her. That's how I would use those two. From the chat, we have Ivan saying, I'm colorblind. That caused me confusion in my work when I use cables of different colors. That would be confusing for sure. Yes, that is something that would be confusing. I think that would be challenging if trying to think, because I used to make network cables when I was a technician, and you'd have to know the orange and the brown and the white, and that would be really confusing. So Brent says, interest rates are going up here in the US to try and fight inflation. We are doing the same thing in Canada. Interest rates have gone up by 0.5. I think in the US they went up by 0.75. You guys are a little more aggressive than us, but it should help. Brent says, I'm also colorblind. I think like 20% of men are colorblind. Interesting. I'm not really, but I think I've mentioned this before. Dark navy blue and black are the same color to me. I can't tell the difference. Dulio says, hey, Ivan Gomez, me too. I'm also colorblind. Yes, colorblind does sound pretty common. 20% says Brent. Let's see here. From Ario over on this side. What? Since when you're doing a live stream? Morning here. Sometimes I feel confused when I watch movies. How could I overcome that thing? So two things, Ario. I'm doing Thursday night live lessons this week and next week, and then it will go back to normal. And I understand that sometimes you're confused when watching movies. The one Transformer movie I watched, everything went so fast, I had trouble following the movie. The movie was confusing for me. Freddie Wolf down in the chat, Bob, about cryptocurrency. In the last days, they had such a drop down, at least 50%, that all people who have this kind of currency are getting to lose their money. So we must be aware of that. Yeah, I think it's a new thing, right? So it's going to have its ups and downs, and it's definitely having a down right now, I would say. It's early days, I think, in that world. Let's see here. Natalia says, "Hi, the devout teacher Bob. Here is the question. Have you ever taken by mistake someone else's cell phone instead of yours and didn't realize it until a few hours later?" Little fix there. No, I've never done that. I really do keep my cell phone in my pocket. I don't often lay it down somewhere. So that has not happened to me. I have taken Jen's car keys instead of mine, though. We have gotten our car keys mixed up, which is bad because my car keys have my work keys on them as well. So that has happened once or twice. Let's see here. Stacy from over here says, "Hi, Teacher Bob. Sometimes culture differences are very confusing for me. Have you ever experienced culture shock or been in trouble due to cultural differences?" No, but I lived in Quebec when I was younger, for 9 or 10 months. And when I came home, I had spoken French for so long, I found it hard to talk to my friends in English. And it was hard to follow. I was very confused. It was an interesting experience for me. And then Ivan in the chat says, "Yes, guys, it's so difficult when you need color for work." That would be a real challenge for sure. Let's see here. Amram says, "How can we eliminate words that have the same meaning?" Yeah, this is a tricky thing with English because we have so many words and some of them mean the same thing. You'll often hear me say things like, "Well, those two words are interchangeable." I use those words interchangeably. That means there's no reason to have two words to be able to say that. So I don't know how to eliminate them, Amran, or how to work around that. That is certainly a challenge. Dulio says, "Hi, teacher. I wonder, how does the moon orbit the Earth? And how does the Earth orbit the sun?" I'm adding a few words in there. Isn't that confusing? Yes. Any kind of, planetary mathematics, calculating orbits, that higher level math makes no sense to me. It's super, super confusing. And I find it very challenging to figure those things out. From the chat, members only, Stacy Gion says, "Sometimes I don't understand why my dog is barking and whining. I guess she was also confused with my order." Yes, sometimes Walter, our new dog, just starts barking for no reason, and we don't know. We're confused. We're like, is there an animal? Is someone driving in? It can be pretty funny sometimes. And sometimes he chases his own tail. That's a little confusing as well. Let's see here. Min from the Vietnamese. Min, the Vietnamese, says, "Hi, Bob. How are you?" I'm good, Min. "What is the difference between home and house?" That's an interesting one, because we do use those interchangeably a bit. But I would say this: if I live in a house, that's the building I'm in. Someone might live in an apartment, and they would call both of those places home. Okay. So when you live in a house, you call it your home. When you live in an apartment, you call it your home. So home is really just where you live. Okay. A house normally is used to talk about the building you are in. And then it gets confusing though, because sometimes you do home repairs. So it's kind of tricky. Like if you live in an apartment, you can do home renovations. So house repairs, home repairs. Anyways, if you stick with that your home is where you live, a house is a building you live in by itself, and an apartment is in a bigger building, that might help you a little bit. Let me check the chat here. Stacy says, "Sometimes I don't." Oh yeah, I read that one already. I'm doing things twice now. Hey, I should welcome the 300 people who are watching. I didn't expect 300 people tonight. I thought it would be a lot less because of the time difference from when I normally do it. So welcome. If you're new here, there's a subscribe button right here. You should click it. It makes me happy. Rod, the English teacher, says, "I'm watching on my phone tonight. I can't at anyone. We have a national holiday in Brazil today." Oh, cool. Happy Friday and a lovely weekend, everyone. That's very cool, Rod. I'm glad you have a day off. I hope you enjoy spending it with your family. And let's see if there's another question here in the question form. So I'm going to see if I can decipher this one. I'm not always good at grammar. Ghost Dog says, Hi, some verbs in present participle are used in very different senses. I have no way to catch the difference of when to say stop to say that and stop saying that. Yes, that's interesting. If someone says something you don't like, you would say stop saying that. And I don't know how exactly to explain it. I think you need to stop. I'm going to make you stop saying that. Yeah, the first one, you're going to have to stop saying that. Yeah, we wouldn't say the first one. I'm trying to think of a way we would say it. But I can see how that would be confusing, Ghost Dog, because the second one doesn't come naturally, I would imagine. Because you learn the first one as proper, but then the second one is how we actually say it. You need to stop saying that. Okay, we're going to go back to the lesson. Let's see here. Nope, I'm going to do a few more chat. Eugene says, when I make T586A or T586B connector cables, I need to count on different colors. Yes, brown, orange, white, orange, blue. Depends how you make it. Yes, I made a lot of those cables back in the day, Eugene. And then put a tester on it, all that stuff. Brent says we have a national holiday in the US on Monday. Very cool as well. I have no holiday in June. We have to wait till July here for a holiday. Let me get a sip of water and we will get back to the lesson. One moment. What were we on? Interest rates, packaging. So I, in particular, find packaging confusing these days, especially this type of packaging. The really hard plastic packaging, that's really hard to open. I find it really confusing because I don't know, like you end up getting a knife or a scissors and it's dangerous when you're trying to get it open. I wish packaging was less confusing. I wish when you bought something, it was really easy to open, that there were clear directions on how to get it open. That would be really, really cool and really, really handy. I know that I find that packaging not just confusing, I find it annoying, actually, this type of packaging. Because I'm like, oh, why did they put it in this hard plastic? And I almost break my scissors when I try to cut it open. You see how she looks confused and angry? That's how I look when I open packages like that. Politics. I will never be mayor or prime minister or a premier. I find politics very, very confusing. I find the fact that they promise all kinds of things and then when you vote for them and they get in, sometimes they don't do them. I'm not just talking about Justin, by the way. I think Justin's great. He's our prime minister right now, but certainly the whole world of politics can be very confusing. Trying to understand why governments do certain things can be very confusing. Sometimes it seems like they're not very smart. Sometimes it seems like they're not thinking things through. So it can be very, very confusing. Politics for sure. Bosses and supervisors can be very confusing. I hope my boss isn't watching this, but sometimes your boss tells you to do things and it doesn't make sense. Sometimes your supervisor at work might tell you to do something and it doesn't make sense. And you're like, okay, this is kind of confusing, but I'll do it anyways. But certainly bosses and supervisors can be very confusing. My recommendation is if you find your boss to be confusing, just be polite when you ask questions about what they are telling you to do. Buying a house. I don't know what this is like in your country, but in Canada, buying a house can be very confusing. It's different than buying a car or buying groceries. You have to go through a realtor and you have to have a lawyer, and it's very, very confusing. That's the word I would use for it. When we bought our farm, we bought it from my mom and we needed a lawyer and we needed to sign all kinds of papers and we needed someone from the bank to get involved. So I would simply just say, do your research. If you're buying a house, try to make it less confusing and hopefully it goes well for you. The price of everything. This is something I find particularly confusing right now. I know that the world is coming out of a pandemic. I know that there is a war going on right now. I know that there are a lot of reasons why the price of everything is going higher, but it can be a little bit confusing for those of us that just want to live our lives to understand what's happening. In Canada, the price of gas has certainly gone up. This is not a joke. This is actually low. The price of gas here is $2.02 a liter. Last week I paid $2.15 a liter. And last week when I bought diesel fuel, I paid $2.29 a liter. So this is actually lower. They said the price of gas might go down. But it's not just gas. The price of everything is going up, and that can be really confusing because we don't always understand why the price is going up. Recycling can be confusing. I'm not sure what this is like in your country, but in Canada, we have a giant poster that tells you how to recycle everything. And it takes a long time to understand that you can recycle certain kinds of plastic, but not others. You have to do this with your glass. You have to do this with your paper, but your cardboard has to be separate from your paper. And it can be really, really confusing. And it worries me because I think people should recycle. Jen and I recycle, but I think if it's too confusing, people might be less likely to recycle. So I find the instructions a little challenging, a little bit confusing sometimes, but just work your way through it if you have the same problem. I think it's good to recycle. Travel. So I do not travel much, but when I travel, I like to travel with someone who knows where they're going or someone who's been there before. When I went to South Africa, I was able to travel with a teacher who had already made the trip once, and that made it a lot less confusing. But travel can certainly be confusing. If you go to another country and you don't hire a guide or a travel agent or someone to help you, you could get lost. You might not know where to go. You might end up going to the bad part of a city, the part you shouldn't go to. Maybe your wallet gets stolen. But sorry, that's not what travel's about though. Travel's about having an enjoyable time, and hopefully you can find a way to make it less confusing than I sometimes do. But travel certainly can be confusing. The universe. So this goes back to earlier in the lesson, someone was asking about planets and orbits. The universe that we live in, I'm pretty sure this is a galaxy, by the way, or it might be a couple of small galaxies. I don't know a lot about space, but when I look up at the night sky, when I see the moon and I see stars, it's all very confusing. I feel very, very small when I do that. And you wonder to yourself, what is the reason for me being here? Like what is being alive? Sorry, I'm getting too philosophical now, but the universe can be confusing. How do black holes work? How do planets form, and how do suns grow and die over millions of years? It's all very, very fascinating, but it's also very, very confusing for someone like me who's not a scientist. And that brings us to this as well. Life can be confusing. This guy looks very confused and maybe a bit sad. Life can be very confusing. If you remember when you were a kid, things are a little more simple. You don't have to worry about as many things. But when you are an adult, you certainly can be very confused about life. Maybe you get a job and you get fired. Maybe you marry someone and you don't get along. Maybe other people make lots of money and you don't. Maybe you make lots of money, but you're sad. Life can be very, very confusing. It can be hard to figure out what you should do to give life purpose. So I'll tell you what I think the secret is to having a better life. And I'm 50 years old. I didn't know this when I was younger. I think you'll have a better life if you just help people. I have a better life because I help you learn English. I know you like learning English from me, but it also makes me feel good about myself. It makes me feel like I'm doing some good in the world. And I think maybe that's a little bit what the meaning of life is, to help other people. So do that today if you can. Jokes can be confusing. So here we have, this is a character called Kermit the Frog. And it says, when someone says a joke, but you don't get it. Sometimes people tell jokes, and instead of laughing, I'm just confused because everyone else is laughing and I don't get the joke. In English, when you say you don't get the joke or you don't get a joke, It means you don't understand it. You don't know why it's funny, and you don't know why everyone else is laughing. There have been many times in my life where someone has told a joke and I didn't get the joke. I didn't understand what the joke was about, and I was just confused. Old people, and before you think I'm being mean to old people, the next slide is young people. Okay, so old people can be confusing. I don't know if my mom's watching this English lesson, but my mom is older, and sometimes I find her to be a bit confusing. She does things in different ways because she's from an older generation. So you might say, old people, they're kind of confusing. Why do they drive so slow? Why do they, let me see, what is something else that I'm not going to go into all the details, but old people, the behavior of old people can be a little bit confusing. Sometimes old people save food past its due date, and they'll have food where you're like, oh, this food's gone bad. Oh, I'm saving that. And it's like, oh, you shouldn't do that. And then we also have young people. I think because I'm 50, I find old people a little bit confusing sometimes. And I find young people a little bit confusing sometimes. Why are these guys just hanging out? Why don't they get a job? Why don't they do something productive? They look super happy. But I think sometimes I'm confused when I see young people because I think, oh, when I was your age, I already had a part-time job. Or when I was your age, I didn't have money to buy really expensive shoes. Sometimes young people are kind of confusing. And then I think you'll like this last one here. Here we go. Driving on the opposite side of the road in another country. I know this is a long description, but when I was in South Africa, I found it very confusing. I had to drive every day, and I found it very confusing. I know it sounds really simple. Oh, the steering wheel's on the opposite side of the car, and you need to drive on the opposite side of the road than you're used to, but it wasn't. So I think as I get older, if Jen and I travel more, when I visit countries where you need to drive on the opposite side of the road, I'll just get an Uber or something like that. I think it's just too confusing. And then when you forget, it gets dangerous, right? If you forget what side of the road you're supposed to be driving on. Hey, so that was a bit of a quick lesson. Actually, not really. It's 7:46, so about 46 minutes. I'm going to answer questions still from the question form, and we'll keep talking about things that are confusing for a bit, and then we'll wrap it up. From Fanderson, what's the difference between seem and look like? So he seems happy, or he looks like he's happy. So I kind of switched your second phrase a bit to be correct. So he seems happy. He looks like he's happy. So in that situation, they mean the same thing. The dog seems hungry. The dog looks like he's hungry. Or that tree seems like it's going to fall over. That tree looks like it's going to fall over. All of those example sentences mean the same thing. If you have a question and you want to ask it in the form, go ahead. I'm just going to kind of look through the chat for a few things. I see Carlos says, I hate bad drivers. I find bad drivers a bit confusing sometimes. I was driving home today behind someone who was swerving and going into the other lane, and that was a little worrisome. It was a little bit strange for me to see that. Let me see here. If you have questions right now, I'll just wait a minute or two. Otherwise, we will wrap this Thursday evening lesson up and go from there. A few things I can tell you while I'm waiting to see if questions come. Number one, next Thursday night, I will be doing another live lesson. Okay. Then a week after that, I will return to Friday morning. So I just need to do this for 2 weeks. Second thing I will say is this. If you are new here, don't forget to click that subscribe button. And thank you for coming and hanging out on a Thursday night. The other thing I'll say is I did not put a video out earlier this week. I was trying to it just didn't work technically. And it's also like the edit. And it's also the last week of school. And I've literally worked every minute of the week. Every waking minute I've been working. So tomorrow I do have something different going on at work, so I don't have to do classes. But as the last day of school, we have different things throughout the day that I have to be at, so I can't do a live lesson. So anyways, that is all of the details for you. Do know this though, this lesson will come out in an edited form in about 2-3 days, where I take out the viewer questions. It becomes a pure lesson about things that confuse people, and it will have fairly accurate English subtitles. They are still automatic, but it's from a service that does a better job, and it's very, very accurate. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. I know it's only been 50 minutes, but I'm going to wrap this up. Brent in the chat says, my last day is tomorrow too. Very cool. Yeah, but I still have exams next week, Brent. So I'm sure you probably have other things going on, but at a high school, we have exam week. So the whole week is students writing exams. So that's what's going to keep me a little bit busier for longer than you. So, but have a good summer anyways. Thanks for watching. I'm going to say bye to everyone and have a good night. Thanks to Todd and Dave for helping out. Bye to Brent and Rod, the English teachers. Bye to Cecilia and Dulio and Freddie Wolf and Paolo. Let me scroll back here. Bye to Eugene and, did I say Freddie Wolf? And Ivan and Rakesh and Ario is here somewhere. Bye. The names are different when you do it at a different time. Bye to Stacy and all the other members who are here as well. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. Have a great night if it's still night where you are. Go to bed if you're in Europe somewhere. It's too late. You shouldn't be watching. And I hope everyone has a good day, has a good Friday, and has a great weekend ahead. Bye.